Hi everyone. Once again, we would like to thank all of you for attending our joint webinar, Business Continuity for Service Providers with 5nine Software and Veeam. Know that this session is being recorded and we will share the video along with the slides in a couple of days after the webinar. Also, we will run a Q&A session at the end, so please do not hesitate to ask questions. For that, you can use question box on the GoToWebinar console. For today's session, we have two brilliant speakers. It's Jason Eckert, who is Systems Engineering Manager for Veeam, and Simon Perryman, Vice President of Business Development for 5nine Software. And let's get started, and I want to pass my word to Simon.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello and welcome everybody for joining this webinar. 5nine and Veeam, we wanted to go and put on this joint webinar here for our service providers because we really believe we have a lot of synergy here. When you look at kind of the key critical things for securing a data center, a private cloud, or a hosted environment, having security and having a backup and disaster recovery plan are key. So what we wanted to do in this session is kind of give you some best practices and show you how 5nine Cloud Security and Veeam software are going to be able to help you achieve the highest levels of availability possible. So we're going to start by talking about 5nine Cloud Security and talk about the Azure Pack extension. We're then going to move on to discuss Veeam and its best practices around high availability, taking a look at backup, replication, and monitoring, and then being able to offer some of these solutions as a service for our service provider. Again, please ask questions throughout the event. We'll be monitoring the Q&A and having a discussion at the end of the session. Let's get started with 5nine Cloud Security. But first, who is 5nine Software? Well, we were founded in 2009, right after the introduction of Hyper-V. And we have always built software for Hyper-V. And that contrasts with a lot of the security companies out there that may have started with VMware or just started with a base platform and then went and tried to adopt it for virtualization. What you're going to find is, virtualization security is very different, and we've done a lot of optimizations purely around Hyper-V to make it the fastest and most secure option available. Now, we've been growing pretty fast. We have staff in 24 regions worldwide and have 18 Microsoft MVPs that are partnered with us. We now have over 80,000 Hyper-V users globally, covering all of our different products. Now, we're going to be focusing on 5nine Cloud Security today, but we also have a solution called 5nine Manager, which is kind of a centralized Hyper-V management solution, almost like a small version of System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And this actually integrates with Veeam Backup as well. So you can use 5nine Manager to actually configure and monitor your entire infrastructure and also receive data about Veeam Backup and Replication, how that's doing, all through a single consolidated console. And for those VMware users out there, we also have a V2V converter that will migrate VMware virtual machines over to Hyper-V. Now, if you're a worldwide audience, we do want to make sure that we can support you in any of the main regions, any of the main countries. We're growing very fast. And as you see from Veeam, they're also worldwide. So we're more than happy to work with you guys, finding a local partner, and can offer local language support in most cases as well. So what is 5nine Cloud Security? So this is our unified security and compliance solution, again, specifically designed for Hyper-V. Now, the reason why we decided to build a security solution just for Hyper-V is because virtualization security is different. It's not the same as you used to secure traditional environments where you may have 10 or 20 servers that don't really change much. Back in those legacy environments, the way you would do security was actually installing an agent on each of those physical servers, and that agent would do things such as run the security scan, update the definitions, report information back to the central source. And that's pretty fine if you have a static environment. But you have to think that virtualization is different. It's dynamic, especially if you're a hosting or a service provider. When you think about virtualization, VMs are starting up and shutting down, often without the administrator even knowing they exist. You have end users that are renting virtual machines from you. They may or may not have any interest in security whatsoever. And so what we try to do here is take a look at some of these challenges around having to log into every virtual machine and install an agent and figure out a solution how we can do that all without any agents. And that's the key to our solution here, managing everything agentlessly. So how exactly does that work? Well, if you kind of think about how a threat's going to arrive at a virtual machine, it's going to come through the network. First, it's going to go through the physical host. So they're going to go through the virtual switch. And then finally, up to the virtual machine itself. And if you kind of look at this virtual switch, that's not just going to be able to take a look at the traffic going from the outside world to the VM. That's also going to be routing the traffic from one VM to another VM. So this virtual switch is kind of a single point of convergence for all of the different types of traffic that are going to go through this environment. And as such, this is where we actually are able to install the agent, and this is how it protects the virtual machine. Now, the way this works is Hyper-V's virtual switch is known as being extensible. And what that basically means is software companies like ourselves, we're able to write kernel-level drivers, such as a network driver, and we can actually go and filter all of the inbound and outbound traffic. And this is how we do our security. We're basically going to take a look at the traffic that's going to the VM and say whether it's safe, or whether we think there's a problem with it. It might not be secure, and we need more information. And this essentially gives us the ability to do all of our protection at the Hyper-V host level. Again, without having to go and install anything inside the virtual machines. So what are the benefits for a service provider? Well, by not having to go and log into each virtual machine, you really are adding this extra layer of separation and extra layer of isolation. Now, from the user's perspective, especially if they're a non-technical user, this is going to be really beneficial because they don't have to see it. They don't have to worry about it. They don't have to update it. Now, if you're using a regular Windows PC, you probably get prompted once a week to go update your Windows Defender virus definitions. So you'll probably do that, but it kind of gets annoying. So what we try to do here is remove all of that burden from the end user, have all of that security managed at the host level by the admin. And by being able to centrally manage everything at the host level as well, you get consistency in your antivirus definitions. You're not relying on the end users to go and update their libraries individually. Now, the biggest security threat that we hear from service providers, though, are when bad guys go and try to attack their own infrastructure. Now, one of the most common ways that cyber attacks are launched are actually through service providers. You'll have a criminal that goes and uses a stolen credit card, purchases a virtual machine, disables the security in that VM, and then goes and commits the crime, whether it's on the outside world or even attacking the hoster themselves. But we're able to bypass this critical security gap because we don't have that security software running inside the virtual machine. So there's nothing for the bad guys to disable. And even if they want to go and launch their attack, we're still going to pick up the traffic, we're going to pick up the threat as it travels through the network, through that host, and gets filtered by our virtual switch. So that's really beneficial here, certainly for service providers. And then you've also got to think about the administrative privileges as well. If you need to go and install a security agent, you're probably going to have to log into that virtual machine or at least run a script. And that's a huge security and compliance flaw in a service provider's world. But now, without having to actually install those agents inside the VMs, admins never need to access them, so you can get guaranteed higher levels of security. Now, what we did with 5nine Cloud Security as well is we really try to approach it through multiple levels. The first type of security that you're going to see, which is very common, is of course a firewall. And so what we're doing here is we're intercepting that network packet and we're taking a look at information in the header and say, okay, where are you coming from? Where are you going to? What protocol are you? And only if you are allowed through will we then allow this network packet to travel. Next is it's actually going through the network, we mirror it, and we'll do a scan on that actual network packet and try to do a live alert if there's actually a threat contained in it. Now, once that data gets written to the disk, we're able to go and scan those disks very efficiently, in fact, fastest in the industry, and we'll talk more about that shortly. We then also do network intrusion detection. So as we're starting to see all of these packets go in and out of every virtual machine, we can start to build up algorithms and kind of understand what this infrastructure actually looks like. We then have the ability to do custom heuristics. So we'll build a baseline of your normal traffic patterns and analyze that and alert you if there's anomalies. And finally, we have a highly extensible system as well. So we're able to go and hook into various different analytics systems. So this is how we're trying to provide the multiple layers of security. And so why is this important for hosters, service providers, or even large organizations running their own private cloud? Well, first, when you have a virtual firewall, it readily scales. Physical firewalls don't. Now, if you're a hoster and you have multiple tenants, they also probably have multiple virtual machines, possibly with different guest operating systems. Now, Hyper-V supports a whole variety of operating systems: Windows Server, Windows Client, Linux, and Unix. We support every single one, and the reason why is we don't actually care what that guest operating system is. Remember, we're doing all of our security and intercepting the packet before it even arrives at that VM. So this means that service providers can configure consistent global rules and apply them, and users can go and select those rules and say, hey, I have a SQL virtual machine. It doesn't really matter if it's SQL running on Windows Server 2008, 2012. I can go and apply consistent firewall rules and policies. Now, the second level of detection we talked about is our live network scanning. And what we're able to do here is take unencrypted traffic, and as it's actually passing through the network, we mirror it, and we'll do a live scan trying to match it against different antivirus signatures. Now, we don't build our own antivirus signatures. We actually work with 3 different third parties. So if you're interested in 5nine, you'll actually have the option of selecting Bitdefender, Kaspersky Labs, or ThreatTrack as your antivirus option. And what we actually do is we handle all the licensing. So you come to us, you acquire a license through 5nine, and we pay royalties to all these different antivirus vendors. So you have a multi-engine approach. You can kind of pick which is best for you, best for your environment. Now, the third level of security, and where we've really built in a lot of optimizations, is how we do antivirus scans on the disk. Now, in a traditional data center, antivirus scans take up the most resources. They could take out to a 30% performance hit when you're actually doing a scan. And the reason why is when you're actually looking for viruses, you're basically doing a lot of mathematical calculations on every file, on every disk, and every virtual machine. That takes up a lot of computing power and cycles, and that's going to slow down the virtual machines if the host is running at full capacity. Now, if you're a service provider, right, you make money by running as many VMs as possible on a host, and it's still important to make sure that they don't have a performance impact with each other. So what we're able to do here, by allowing you to have more efficient scans without these performance hits, you can actually run more virtual machines on each host. So in the long run, this solution could even save you money by helping you increase your VM density. Now, the way we do this so efficiently is we leverage what's called change block tracking. And instead of having to scan the disk, the entire disk every time, we're only going to scan the blocks of data which have changed. So let's say I have a 1 terabyte disk. If I had to go and scan that every couple of hours, that's a lot of processing power. But if I'm tracking what's changed since my last scan, maybe I only have to scan 1 megabyte or 10 megabytes. So that's how we're able to do this so fast and so efficiently, and we're able to have the fastest disk scans for Hyper-V. Now, we wanted to extend this as well, and we've started to see that one of the most common security threats are things like advanced persistent threats, man-in-the-middle attack, these kind of advanced attacks. And so we partnered with Cisco Snort, and we leveraged their intrusion detection engine. And what intrusion detection is, it's basically going to look for kind of anomalies in the data center. One of the most common types of attack you've probably heard of is the denial of service attack, where you have a single computer or web server and there's lots of users visiting it at the same time. Well, this is actually a type of traffic pattern that we can model. If we see that there's an unusual spike to one particular endpoint, lots of repeated requests getting sent, we can say, hey, it looks like this is this type of attack. Let's flag it, let's isolate it, let's try to go remediate it. And so what we've done is we've leveraged Cisco Snort's definitions and signatures, and we're just constantly logging all of the traffic in your data center so we can detect these kind of advanced threats and these different types of anomalies. Now, we also realize that every data center is different, and every customer is different. So we also do custom analytics for your data center as well. So what's going to happen is, over time, we're going to build up a pattern of what's normal operating behavior in your data center, taking a look at different days of the week, different times of day, different protocols that you're using, and build what we call our baseline. Now, if we notice that there's anomalies, there's certain spikes or very unusual deviations beyond this baseline, we can actually alert you on this as well. And so what you see here is kind of a combination of signature-based intrusion detection in the last example, and then heuristics-based intrusion detection in this example. So you get the best of both worlds. You get protection from the most common threats, and you get customized protection for your own data center as well. And certainly last but not least, we want to make our platform extensible. So Five9 writes all of the events in a syslog format, which is very standard throughout the industry. And then this gives us the ability to go and export those logs to other types of data analytics or collection systems, including things like Splunk, Azure Operational Insights, OMS, SQL Server reporting services, so quite a variety of different tools that you can go and read this data through. Now, as you see it here, we've tried to build all of these different layers of protection. But one of the biggest advantages here, and something great for service providers, is being able to have automatic protection of all new virtual machines, disks, and networks. And we're able to offer this because as long as your host is protected, as soon as you deploy a new virtual machine on that host, it's going to go into an automatic default security group. And so most people will say, lock everything down, that's my default group. But what's really great about this is, especially as a service provider, you don't have to worry about these newly deployed VMs not being patched or not being serviced. Again, as soon as that VM's created, it's protected because it's already running behind the firewall, behind the intrusion detection system, getting antivirus scans for all of the traffic going to it. So you're able to get that immediate protection that you need. Now, with this type of environment as well, it's important to scale. Security needs to have high availability as well. For example, if there's a virus that's just been found, you need that security system to be online and running so that we can alert the admin that that virus exists. If your security solution isn't highly available, you potentially are at a lot of risk here. So what we try to do is build a highly available, highly scalable security platform. Now with Five9 Cloud Security, there's a main management console. And that can run, that's basically a Windows application. It can run on a VM, it can run on a client laptop. Anywhere that you can run a Windows application is kind of your core virtual machine, your core platform. We then use a SQL Server as our database, which is going to store all of the information, all of the network logs. We then want to go and manage it, and there's 4 different ways that we could go and manage Five9. We have our traditional console, we have PowerShell, we have Azure Pack, and we have System Center Virtual Machine Manager. And we're going to be talking about these last 2 in a moment, as they're really focused on our service providers. So now that we've gone and configured our security infrastructure, we go and add our different hosts and clusters under protection. And if we want to start scaling up, we can start providing redundancy, have multiple redundant management groups, use SQL high availability, SQL clustering. And if you have multiple data centers, you can do synchronization to make sure that the roles are copied from one location to another if there's a break, if they get disjointed. Now, the System Center Virtual Machine Manager is what most of our enterprise customers are using if they're using Hyper-V. And what we found is, if they're using this, they have a desire to centrally manage all of their virtualized resources. And so we said security should be the same thing. So we have a plugin for System Center Virtual Machine Manager that's going to allow you to centrally manage all of your different resources from a single console, a single location. And we'll take a quick look at that shortly as well. Finally, our last component here, specifically for service providers, is our Azure Pack plugin. So first of all, what exactly is Azure Pack, Azure Stack? That term's been started to use a lot, and there's kind of 2 technologies out here that we're transitioning between. So basically, what Azure Pack is Microsoft Azure, all of those cloud services, but it can run in your data center on your hardware. So what we're basically able to do here is provide an experience for tenants or end users where they can go to a website and make requests, and then also an administrator's experience on the back end where they can go and configure the infrastructure. Now, if you kind of compare and contrast this to Microsoft Azure's public cloud, we only have access to the tenant portal. I'm only a consumer when I go and log into Microsoft Azure. And Microsoft IT runs all of the back end. And so that means Microsoft IT controls all the policies. How big are my virtual machines? What type of storage can I use? What's my availability or backup or replication? And they give you limited options. And the biggest challenge that we heard is data sovereignty. Where is my data being stored? There's only about 17 or 18 Microsoft Azure data centers worldwide in about 10 different countries. So this means, for example, if you're based in Canada, your data is going to get sent and stored in the United States because that's where the closest data center is. And that's really tough for a lot of people that have sensitive information. Governments, health, legal, the data has to stay within the country. And so this was kind of the driving force of why Microsoft said, Azure's a great technology, but we need more Azure data centers worldwide. We can't spend $15 billion building them in each and every country. So let's go enable our service providers to be able to offer Azure inside their own data center. And that's what Azure Pack is. It's Azure running in your data center. Now, Azure Pack's been out for about a year, and Microsoft's already started to talk about its next iteration of this, known as Microsoft Azure Stack, which should be coming out sometime in late 2016. So between these technologies, 5nine has a security as a service solution that allows us to go and plug into this interface and go and centrally manage all of the security as either a service provider or as a tenant. And our whole goal with this is to really simplify all the security management. Go to a web page, turn on your antivirus, create an antivirus scan, apply a template to a VM, and do that in bulk. Instead of having to log into each and every virtual machine and configure the firewall there and turn on intrusion detection and install an agent, I get to do this from one single centralized location. And we have both of these experiences with the administrator's side, where they can go and configure the policies around security, and then from the end user's side, where they have an ability to easily configure their own security settings if they need. But probably the biggest value that we're able to add to our service providers is a new revenue stream. If you're a service provider and you're taking advantage of security as a service or backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, this is a value add that you can then pass on to your customers. Service providers are almost becoming resellers. And so what we found with 5nine Cloud Security is everybody's saying it's so critical, we're going to turn it on by default. Now, we charge our customers about $2.50 per virtual machine per month. And we see our service providers charging either $5 or $10 per virtual machine per month. Now, we've deployed to some of the largest hosters in the United States, and the feedback that we're getting from them is they think over the first 12 months, they're going to make profit of over $100,000 simply by deploying this and offering this or requiring this to each and every one of their customers. So when you're thinking about security here, don't just think that, hey, I'm a service provider, I just want to protect my tenants. What we're able to offer here is a great solution to protect the Hyper-V infrastructure. It's going to be a great security solution to protect your end users and your tenants. It's going to make you more competitive because you no longer have to log into the VM, so you can meet more compliance laws. And now you can actually generate revenue from it. So you're paying money to invest in the security solution, but you can actually make money from it in the long run by using the service provider model. And the biggest challenge that service providers have that we're really helping here is making them become more competitive, helping them meet more compliance and regulation requirements. The reality is most infrastructures now are virtualized, and so many of the different compliance laws worldwide have specific policies about how to secure or how to protect your virtualized environment. Regulators know about it, the infrastructure knows about it, but also the bad guys know about it too. So virtualized infrastructures are being very specifically targeted, very specifically attacked. Now, our whole goal here for the service providers, right, is this concept of being agentless. You don't have to log into the virtual machine. The admin doesn't see what the tenant's doing. And that's really the biggest value to help ensure that you're meeting those compliance and those privacy laws. Unlike other clouds, no scripts have to run. No admins have to do setup. There's no delay when the end user wants their virtual machine. We spin it up. It's instantly protected. Nobody has to log into it. So they really do have a fully isolated, a genuine private experience. Now with that, I'm actually going to go on and take us through our first demo, giving you kind of a quick tour through 5nine Cloud Security. Now, we're not going to focus too much on the core platform here because we're going to really take a look at the value we can add for service providers. But for any service provider using Azure Pack, they're also going to be using System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So here within System Center VMM, you can see that we've got a fully integrated console, and we have the ability to simply turn on firewall for every virtual machine, intrusion detection, network scanning, traffic anomalies. So we're really trying to focus again on that centralized management experience, bring everybody together, unify the consoles. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Azure Pack itself. Oh, we got a quick timeout here. We'll have to log in. That's always the fun of demos. We can set it up as many times as we want. I'll always make us log back in. So we'll wait for this to reload here. And first thing that we're taking a look at here is the administrators portal. Now, as an administrator, remember, this is the privilege I have with Azure Pack. I configure all of the backend policies. So I could take a look here and I can configure databases, I can configure websites, virtual machines. And the core of all of this configuration as a service provider is creating a plan. So if we want to go and create a plan, this basically will allow people to go and subscribe to different resources. So I'm going to go and create a plan here. We'll call this the demo with V. It's then going to load a list of different services that we can select. And we'll be able to go and select 5nine Cloud Security, confirm all the settings, and we'll be able to go and create a security plan. And I'm going to show you one that I've already gone ahead and configured to save a little bit of time here. So we can see our cloud security plan is active. People can sign up. And as we drill into the different settings, we're going to be able to let different people sign up. We're going to be able to go publish this, be able to advertise it. So this is really trying to integrate within the core Azure Pack offering. Now, another thing that we're able to do using our security as a service console from the administrator is get a centralized view of all of my infrastructure, where we could see hosts, we can see virtual machines, we can create templates, tenants, view other settings. So a lot of information available here. We can configure things such as notifications when different types of alerts or different types of events happen. So again, this is where you're going to be able to centrally configure everything, manage things, and get up and running. But let's go ahead and more importantly and take a look at our tenant experience now. So what I'm now looking at is I'm the end user, I'm your customer, and I've deployed 2 virtual machines. Now what we could do here is to go and protect them, to add 5nine Cloud Security to them, it literally takes seconds. We say, I'm going to add a new VM and protect it, confirm the settings, and click OK. And why does it go so fast? Because we are not installing agents. We're configuring this protection at the host level, so we're really just applying another policy. We're not actually installing anything inside the VM. And from this point, I have my newly created virtual machine. I can see that I have the options of firewall, intrusion detection, traffic scanning, antivirus, and network anomaly. And turning all of these settings on and off, it's as easy as pushing a button. And so if you're a service provider and you have developers, this is a really useful tool because one thing that developers struggle with are having false virus alerts. You know, developers do unusual things with applications where they may have a pair of virtual machines, a network between them, and they're flooding it with information, passing it from one to the other. And in many cases, security engines would pick this up as an attack. So we enable the end users to turn off, turn on, enable or disable the different rules when they need. Now we wanted to make it easy to create templates as well. So if I say, hey, this is my SQL virtual machine, I want to apply the SQL template, click OK, and I've now applied all of the different security policies and best practices for a SQL virtual machine. And when we have the templates, we have global templates that the admins can create, and then local templates just for myself. We can see all of the different actions that are happening around this virtual machine. We could take a look at our notification settings as well, and what other types of information we want to see. So we've had a virus alert, we've had quite a lot of intrusion detection events, and we've had a lot of inbound and outbound traffic going through our firewall. So again, we wanted to simplify that administration. And what's so great about this is you can see all of your VMs in a single view. So if I wanted to apply a template to 10 VMs at once, I could simply go to the first, the second, the third, and click Apply Template. So we've really tried to streamline, centralize all the operations for our service providers here. All right, well that wraps up our demo here, and I'm going to go turn it over to Jason.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. So let me get my monitor shared out real quick, and we will definitely get started with the Veeam side of the presentation. So
you're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Simon. So yes, we are switching gears from 5.9s to Veeam, but we're not really. So what I mean by that, yes, we're going to be talking about data protection. We're going to be talking about backup as a service, DRaaS as a service, but think about what Simon was saying, that Veeam does support multiple hypervisors, so it still holds true for the Hyper-V story with Veeam and 5.9s, what they're bringing to the table from a security perspective. So today, just a really quick agenda. Today, we're going to go take a little bit, we're going to look into Veeam, take a look at a little bit of a history about Veeam, where we've come from, and then we're going to jump straight into the backup and replication piece of our product, talk about the integration with System Center, which plays quite nicely into the whole overall story from an Azure perspective. And lastly, talk a little bit about backup as a service and how this ultimately applies to service providers. We will be talking about it from a local service provider perspective, as well as talking about the Azure story with Veeam sitting inside of Azure. So a lot of good stuff we'll talk about today. So just to give you an idea of where we come from, if you haven't heard anything about Veeam, we've been around for quite a while. So from a product perspective, backup and replication, what we're staying centric of talking about today is on version 9. So we've got around 8 years of innovation with this product. And from a customer base perspective, we're knocking on the door of around 200,000 customers. So our product is definitely prevalent in the enterprise and really all over the place, to be quite honest. Couple of key kind of innovations, if you will. There are a lot of them, and we're not going to talk about all of them. But things around instant Veeam recovery, for example, Q4 of 2010, there's some really good technology that has been brought to the forefront that really allows for you to help out your customers and make sure that ultimately the VMs that you're running do exactly that. They stay running. So this is a little bit about us, if you will. Now, from a product set perspective, Veeam only has 3 products. We're talking about backup and replication today, but no, there are 2 subsequent products that kind of fall under the monitoring or reporting umbrella. And one of them, if you're a 5nines customer or an Azure Pack or an Azure Stack customer, our management pack that plugs into System Center Operations Manager can bring some really great things to the table. So know that that's there as well. But from an architectural perspective, what we're talking about today, we're going to talk a couple of different angles, one from an MSP perspective, and the other one's just going to be from an on-premises perspective. So just to lay that foundation of knowledge about our product once we start talking about Azure in a couple of minutes. So from an architectural perspective, Veeam Backup and Replication is a Windows-based application that ultimately just needs to live on a Windows machine. That could be a virtual or physical machine, really doesn't matter which. So ultimately, it becomes really easy. Download the ISO, install it, and off you go. A couple of clicks, and you're done. No need for a couple of weeks or even a couple of days of professional services. A couple of additional components to know about, one being the proxy. By default, for example, what the proxy is a service that lives on the Veeam server. So ultimately, still nice and easy. You can deploy additional proxies from a load balancing perspective. You can deploy additional proxies from a geographic perspective as well. If you need to back up data center A and keep that traffic centric to data center A, doable. Hypervisors, we support multiple hypervisors. Hyper-V is definitely one of those, and that's Hyper-V 2008 R2 through 2012 R2. Obviously, 2016 is not all the way GA, so that's coming for us as well. Backup disk perspective, let's talk about on-premises first. We're going to take the image level copy of those VMs that we grab, we compress them and deduplicate them on premises, and we put them on a disk. So ultimately, from an architectural perspective, Veeam's really easy stuff. Now, this is not to say it's complicated, but there is more to Veeam backup than just backup, because it is backup and replication. So what backup and replication is going to do, most specifically the replication piece of it, it will allow you to have DR. So ultimately it is host-based replication that will give you a copy of the VM on the other side. If that other side is in another private data center, doable. You do need administrative access to the host to make it happen. But if you can give that to us, we're good. And at that point, we're going to give you the ability to back up, give you a lot of great granular restoration capabilities against it, and we'll give you DR in the exact same package. So ultimately, you have a nice solution that will allow you to really do whatever you need to do in case of any disaster. So it can be multiple VMs on the other side. It could be 1 or 2 VMs. It doesn't matter which. The replication piece of our software, there are WAN accelerators that you can apply to that to get the machine over to the other side in an expedient manner. So let's talk about a couple of restoration capabilities I'd made mention of in that reverse roadmap, one of them being an instant VM recovery. If you have a dead VM, there's going to be people looking for you to get that back up and going as soon as possible. Veeam does give you quite a few different options to make that happen. And yes, instant VM recovery is one of them. So most specifically, what instant VM recovery is, think of it as a spare tire. So you have a dead VM or VMs. What we're going to do is take that dead VM and turn it on from the backup file. So you ultimately have the ability to put your users back to work very, very quickly. And if the question is lingering of how quick is it, how quick does that machine take to boot up? But remember, in that same statement, this is going to be running a VM from a compressed and deduplicated state. So there is going to be some overhead of a VM not being fully hydrated on the disk. But if you're in that big of a need to get it back up and going, this is a fantastic way to make it happen. Now, it's a spare tire. Just like the analogy of you have a spare tire on your car, at some point you need to take the spare tire off. So that being said, if you do an instant VM recovery, you have the ability when you're done, you're ready to migrate that machine back online, do exactly that, migrate it back online. And it's as simple as right-clicking on that instantly recovered VM and say migrate back online. At that point, if you're using things like live migration, it becomes a very, very, very seamless process. So good things to be had. Sure Backup, on-demand sandbox, virtual labs. Those are terminologies you're going to hear when you hear somebody at Veeam talking about making sure that what you have backed up is good. By default, there is a simple integrity check done on every single backup file that Veeam does. But to take that farther down the road, first of all, you can take that farther. And what we're going to do to take it farther is we're going to take the VM that you backed up, the entire image of the VM, so it is the VM in its entirety, living on that secondary storage in the compressed and deduplicated state, and we turn it on. And when we turn it on, we run a series of tests against it to make sure when that time does come, it can be restored. So that's from an application perspective, from a heartbeat perspective, a lot of great tests that are included, simple check of a check mark to make them run, and you can even go farther from a scripting perspective if you need to test specific ports or test this or that that's not that predefined check mark. Now, where we boot up the VMs for testing is inside a sandbox, if you will. It is an isolated network that Veeam creates. So point being, if you're not doing this from a recovery validation perspective, you want to let someone in, maybe dev. You want to let them inside of that virtual lab and do tests, run patches, do upgrades, or whatever the case may be. You can map that isolated network back to an individual user or users or a scope IP addresses so they can RDP into it and do their test, and nobody's none the wiser. So that, once again, is included in our software. Now, we can do it from a backup perspective, and we can do it from a replication perspective as well. I talked about the fact that it would be running from a compressed and deduplicated state. If you need more of a real-world test, you could do it from our replication as well, because a Veeam replica is an identical copy of that VM sitting on another host, fully hydrated. And once again, LAN acceleration still applies here, but you can boot that up in the same lab and still run the same test against it if need be from a heartbeat perspective, or you can leave it inside that lab to do your patching, do your tests, do your upgrades, or whatever the case may be. Likewise, with having someone log into it if need be, they definitely can log into it and run their tests from that side as well. So giving you a lot of flexibility from a DR/testing perspective. Something else to talk about, and this really comes into the MSP play with us, is the ability for Veeam to get your backups off-site. And from a perspective of where you get them off-site, we don't care. It could be another disk-to-disk to dedupe appliance, disk-to-disk to cloud, This is just a tape. So there's a lot of great options that are built into our software, and you do have the ability to choose whatever you see fit. It's completely up to you, but that play from a cloud perspective, and we're going to get into this in a moment, that could be inside of Azure. That could be you, a service provider, offering backup as a service to your clients and set up shop inside of Azure to make it happen. So really it becomes nice and easy stuff. Now, something else about backup to make notation of is the obvious, the granular recovery that Veeam brings to the table. There are a lot of great recovery options. We already talked about one of them, instant Veeam recovery. There's file level recovery. There's VHDX level recovery. You name it. In addition, you can get deeper. You can get deeper from an application perspective. You need a nice, easy way to recover, say, an Exchange Server email. Doable. You need to dig into a SharePoint database to go restore content or whatever the case may be. Done. SQL Server, Active Directory, and things that are not even Microsoft-centric. So you've got a homegrown application. That's something we can leverage our Azure Backup, the virtual lab, to still make happen. So let's talk about the cloud portion of our software. There's something that is built in called Veeam Cloud Connect. What this is, it's really twofold, to be quite honest. One side of this is going to be the ability for you as a owner of Veeam Backup and Replication to get your backups to the cloud. Now, from a cloud perspective, you do have the ability to target whatever cloud you wish. From an alternate perspective on the Veeam Cloud Connect software, there's the managed service provider aspect of this as well. What they're going to do is offer you as a client the ability to store your Veeam backups inside of their cloud. That cloud could be in Azure, it could be elsewhere, it could be public, private, whatever the case may be. But as a Veeam Backup and Replication or a potential Veeam Backup and Replication customer, what that means is you have the ability to get your backups off-site. One, you have the ability to get them off-site very easily. You have the ability to get them off-site secure as well. So that architecture we were talking about previously, the compression and deduplication happens on premises. Then that compress and deduplicated file goes over the wire to the cloud repository that the tenant, the managed service provider, has carved out for you. It is done over a single port. There is WAN acceleration that can be applied to that as well. Now, that's to get your backups off-site. There is functionality to get your replication off-site as well. Once again, same premise of a singular port getting your replicas off to another host. And once again, this is part of the Cloud Connect software that is built into backup and replication version 8 and version 9 for replication, by the way. And it's going to give you the ability to have DR in the cloud as well. So if it's just backups, if it's backups as well as replication, to be quite honest, it doesn't matter. Now, let's switch gears 1 second. This is the Azure Marketplace. Inside of the Azure Marketplace, some of the software that I've talked about from a managed service provider perspective is available right here, right now on the Azure Marketplace. So there's Veeam Cloud Connect for the enterprise. And I'm not going to go into the details. You can just as easily go to the Azure Marketplace and see the details behind it. But this is going to allow an enterprise solution that has an agreement with Microsoft to set up shop and push your backups into Azure very easily. For service providers, the exact same thing. If you would like to offer that as a service for your clients have backup and replication. Don't forget, we've got about 200,000 of them. You have the ability to be listed in our provider directory and have the ability to do that. Likewise with the managed backup portal. All of this is sitting on the Azure Marketplace today. Go take a look at it, check it out. Feel free to give it a test run. So what I'd like to do next, first of all, I'm quickly running out of time. I would like to be conscientious of everyone's time. I would like to give everyone just a very quick glance into Veeam Backup and Replication. It looks by the audience view that everybody can see this correctly. And this is Veeam Backup and Replication. One of the very first things you need to do when you install Veeam is give us access to the hypervisor. So you're running 5.9s. You're using Azure Stack, Azure Pack. You've got VMM. You're using it on a day-to-day basis. The seamless transition into Veeam is let us know your VMM server. Give us the address of it, give us the credentials to it, and you're done. What that's going to do is give us that agentless view inside of your infrastructure so we can do our job. And what that job is the obvious of protecting the VMs in your Hyper-V infrastructure. So from a restoration perspective, from a failover perspective, this is what we do. You can, on the left-hand side, these are the functionalities you have in Hyper-V, or VMware for that matter, to restore. And those restores can really be anything, like we were saying. It could be the entire VM, it could be the VHD, VHDX of that VM or otherwise, or a file level recovery. And it's, really quickly, I'm going to show you what a file level recovery looks like. First of all, there's not a lot to it. So you pick the VM where you want to get the file from. You pick the point in time, and it is a very simplistic next finish. Now, what's going to happen in the background is we don't restore the entire VM just so you can go get Susie's spreadsheet that got deleted around when she was working on it at lunch. What we are going to do is take that image level copy of the VM that we have backed up, living in the compressed and deduplicated state, and give you visibility into it. So ultimately, you ask Veeam for a file, we give you visibility into the file system, be it C drive, D drive, or otherwise. You go get your file. Completely horrible example of a file, restoring the page file, but file's a file. Right-click, restore. You're done. You can put it back the same place. You can put it back somewhere else. That ease of use is really big with us. Likewise, when you're talking about application items, you want to dig into Exchange, dig into Exchange. And it's all of Veeam's restorations are almost the same, to be quite honest. You pick the server or servers from the point in time. So pick an Exchange server from a point in time, next finish. And remember, I didn't choose a file level recovery. I chose an application item recovery. And in this case, this application is Exchange. And once again, what we don't do, we don't restore 2 terabytes worth of EDB file so you can go get to the granular message level. We just give you visibility into it, and you still can go get to that message level. Once you find the message, right-click, restore it. You're done. So with me running out of time, I'm going to cut it short so we can get to the Q&A. And I think Simon's got a couple of things to wrap up with, so I will keep the presentation on my side, but he is going to summarize a couple of things. We'll leave everyone with a couple of links from a resource perspective, and we'll wrap it up from there. So Simon, I'll let you take over from here.
Thanks so much. So here's a couple of resources that we wanted to present to you. 5nine.com, veeam.com, and of course, if you have questions for myself or Jason, please feel free to ping us directly. We will also be sending out a link to this presentation as part of the follow-up as well, so you'll be able to download this, get access to these, or feel free just to take a screenshot right now. All right, let's go over to our Q&A now. So Jason, I have a first question for you here, and that is, how exactly is Veeam licensed? Are you licensing per virtual machine, per host, per memory? How do you guys actually do your licensing?
You got it. So there's a couple of different licensing models. Well, there's 2. One is just the normal perpetual licensing. I want to be a Veeam customer. You buy it, you own it. And from a licensing perspective, if you have 2 hosts, say it's 50 hosts, whatever. 50 hosts, dual processors, you need 100 licenses. We are not capacity-based. We're not agent-based because we don't have them. And however dense you want to virtualize on those 50 hosts, that's your prerogative. We're not going to penalize you for buying a nice processor or having something like 5nine. It's just going to allow you to virtualize more densely. So hopefully that helps.
Great, thanks. And I actually have the exact same question for 5nine. How do we do our licensing? So we align with the Microsoft licensing model where it's per 2 CPUs. So a standard host with 2 CPUs would be 1 license. And that's just consistent with Hyper-V licensing, System Center licensing. So however many licenses you purchase for that would be what you're looking at with 5nine. And again, I did mention this earlier, but I'll emphasize a point. With the different antivirus vendors, with Cisco Snort for Business, all of those licenses are included in our license. So there's no additional cost with a single vendor, and we pay royalties to those organizations on the back end. And in many cases, we've actually found that we are cheaper than some of those antivirus vendors if you go to them direct, just because we get such a good discount here. So as you're looking for a new antivirus solution, definitely check out the different options we have.
And Simon, I'm going to interrupt you real quickly. Remember, there are 2 licensing models with Veeam. The other one, follows exactly what 5nine is doing. If you're coming at it from a service provider perspective, it's per VM. So at that point, if you're consuming 10 VMs, you pay for 10 VMs. As your business grows, you have the ability to scale that up and really have the same licensing model.
Yep, that's right, and you absolutely touched on the SPLA license. We charge per virtual machine per month for our service providers as well. But what we really try to encourage our service providers to do is, use our solution to protect the core infrastructure, so they're, domain controllers, Active Directory, that type of thing, and then go with the service provider model for your tenants, because that gives you the most flexibility, allowing you to scale up or down based on demand. Okay, I have a second question for you, Jason. Do you guys have any type of Azure Pack plugin directly into Azure Pack or Azure Stack?
Ooh, good one. So not as of current. Obviously, there's a lot changing Azure Pack versus Azure Stack, 2016. So definitely stay on the lookout. There's a lot of good stuff coming down the road.
Okay, great. Thank you.
How was that for being politically correct? Did I do okay?
That was very, very neutral. I liked it.
Thank you.
Next question is another question for you here. So do you guys have the ability to go and actually push a backup into a cloud? Like, just for clarification, can you actually use your local data center and basically use Microsoft Azure as kind of like your disaster recovery site?
So careful with that one. So if it is Azure, at that point, remember I was talking about replication, we do need administrative access to the hypervisor. That case, no. But if your version of DR is I just need a backup in the cloud, in that case, yes. On the one more flip side, if you're using one of our service providers that is using Veeam Cloud Connect, offering the replication as a service, at that point, yes. So there's, and I'm not meaning to be vague by any scope of the imagination, but there are, a lot of times it does come if somebody has a very specific question about, can I do this, can I do that, with Azure Pack, with Azure Stack, or my cloud. We have a team of engineers that can guide you through that process and definitely get you the answers you need. So once again, a very neutral answer, and my official answer, final answer is it depends.
All right, thank you, Jason. Well, this wraps up the webinar. Thank you for everybody that attended. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Jason directly, or contact your local sales representative at 5nine or Veeam. We hope that you've learned a lot from this session. We hope you've taken away some best practices around how you can secure and improve your virtualization stack, as well as doing backup, replication, and being able to offer this as a service, giving you better opportunities for your customers, more services, so that they can be more successful as well. Well, thank you for joining me, Jason. This concludes the webinar. Thank you.